it's Don here from the board, and we are currently about an hour and 15 away from 2018. So I'm hanging out at home on New Year's Eve, not really much of a party going person, my daughter's asleep, and I thought, why not, let's do a build stream. Well, I had kind of mentioned it yesterday on the podcast, and I thought, I don't have anything that's happening right now, so let's go ahead and do one. So I am talking a little bit quiet, only in the sense that because my daughter is actually asleep out there, so I'm trying to not wake her up, even though she might wake up anyway, so if she does, you'll probably hear it. Now the keyboard that I'm going to be building today is part of one of the packages that I'd bought on Taobao, and at the time it was one of the cheapest 60% keyboards that was available. And how is it going, Simply? Thanks very much for coming along and checking out the stream. Much appreciated. And Mendez, Happy New Year's, Mendez. Happy New Year's, Andrew. Thank you very much. Can't stay on because you're on data. It's all good. It's great to see you dropping in anyway. So, as I was saying, it was one of the cheapest keyboard kits that you could possibly find on Taobao, and it only came to $54 Australian, which was ridiculously cheap. Now, of course, the links that I have available may not necessarily reflect the prices I paid back then, as well as the fact that better options and different options may already turn up in between when I put in that order to now when I'm doing the stream. So I'm going to switch over to the desktop and let's have a look at what you can get as part of that kit. So I got some stabilizers, I got a bunch of switches, hopefully there's enough there. I've got a plate, it's an aluminium plate by the feel of it. Yep, just a straight up aluminium plate. We've got a PCB. Now this was actually a little bit more expensive because it's an RGB PCB, RGB underglow, so you can see that there's the RGB there. The cheapest version of this PCB was actually out of stock, so I wasn't able to get that, but it's still roughly in that price range. It was only $5 more for this. Now, one person from the Australian MetKeys Discord has actually said that this PCB is absolute trash. They tried to do a build with it and they end up throwing the PCB into the bin. Whether we will find the same thing with this or not, I do not know, but we'll build it anyway, and if it turns out to be, as Harold said, absolute trash, just may have to end up doing a desoldering run to take my switches back off them and then put them into another build. And then of course, to complete the build, we have our case. It's just a very simple, cheap plastic case, and as you can see, it's got molded screws in there as standoffs, and it's got some 3M rubberized bits of plastic that come with it so that you can actually put it on so it won't slide around. And then there's some ports there if you have resets available on your PCB, or dip switches, and by the looks of it this one doesn't, so those holes will serve very little to no purpose in this build. And hello Relax Chan, thank you very much for coming along and hanging out. Now this is a very unusual time for me to be building because normally I would work on a build or a live stream on a weekend during the day, Australia time. So the people who are going to be potentially turning up today will probably be very different to the people that I normally have turning up on my streams. But if you can make it, that's fantastic. If you're watching this as video on demand later, yeah, hopefully you had a great New Year's Eve and Happy New Year to you. Now, the tools that I will be working with is my TS100 soldering iron. I have done a slight modification to it now where I've actually wrapped solder around the front of this. The reason is because the soldering iron is actually very light, and even though it's tip heavy, it's not sufficiently tip heavy once you plug the power jack into the back, and the cable weight tends to drag it and lift it up. So I was talking to somebody and I was joking about, oh, you might as well just get lead tape and wrap it around, and I realized I've got solder. I've got a kilo of solder here on this spool, but I've actually got another spool which has 1 millimeter, so this is 0.7 mil, and I've got 1 millimeter solder that I don't even use because it's huge. It's too big for most of what I do and what I prefer. So I've gone and wrapped four layers worth, and you can see it under the tape there, and I've just taped it to hold it as well as to stop a lot of that rubbing off if I'm accidentally touching and contacting it. And it added about 10 grams of weight to the front, and it's changed the balance, which is nice. So I've got my brass tip cleaning scrubby pad thing. I've just got a holder here for the actual iron. I've got my solder, of course, and I have my quad hands workbench, my trusty clampy Modulio. So when you build a 60% build, some of the things that you have to be very careful and aware of is obviously your layout, because a universal plate like this one here offers different layouts, and if you don't get that right and you start putting stuff in, you're going to have a bad time. You have to make sure that your switches are seated in the correct positions on the PCB if the PCB offers a lot of compatibility, because it'll have different positions for that as well. So the easy way to do that is to put keycaps onto switches and then lay them out first to check, make sure that you got them in the right slot, then you pop them in. The second thing that you have to do is you have to make sure that you get your stabilizers in first, because if you don't and then you try and put them in afterwards, you're also going to have a really bad time. So I'm taking out the stabilizers and I'm going to install them onto the PCB first. So let's just take the quad hands off the desk first. Hey, no worries, Jolly Green Giant. Thanks for coming along. Yes, almost 4 a.m., but you're a day behind, so you got plenty of time to catch up and have a happy new year. Hope you sleep well. And yeah, I will chat to you later. Alright, so let's just bust out the PCB. Hey, Hashit. Am I going to clip and lube the stabilizers? No. That was a very quick answer. I don't even know how to really clip stabilizers. I've watched videos on it and I'm not 100% sure, but you know what? I've never had what people call mushy stabilizers. Like, I understand what the concept is, and it frees up the movement and you've got less contact, so that supposedly you don't get like this bouncy feel on it. But maybe I don't bottom out my stabilizers very hard. So the feet on the stabilizer, I don't know if it's going to focus very well. They've got like this little bit that protrudes and it springs. Like, I don't think it's going to focus it very well. And what they do is they clip off these opposite corners on them, so it actually stops these little hook bits from contacting and removes that bounce. Yeah, so they've got these legs and they do like this on the end of them, and like it's tiny ass little. Oh, I'm just gonna see if I can get that to. I don't think it's gonna work very well because the camera's trying to focus on stuff on the background. Oh, there we go. So see, there's like that little tiny hook. That is the part that people are talking about. That's the mush. So if you clip that hook off, that entire leg, and it's one on each side. So if you clip those two off, it will actually reduce this mush feeling that people are talking about, because you don't get the little bit of bounce on it. But I don't think that's ever been an issue for me, simply because I don't bottom out my spacebar. So if you are somebody who does bottom out their spacebar, well, you probably want to do that. As for lubing, these don't feel too bad, and also because I don't have anything to apply thick lube with at the moment, so I'm not going to do that either. And yeah, it's also because I can't be bothered. It's New Year's Eve. Come on. Hashit, thank you very much for joining the stream. Happy New Year, and congratulations on making a numpad, finding that footprint file. Sorry that I sent you on a wild goose chase with that wrong footprint initially, so hopefully that wasn't too detrimental. Now I'm just going to lay out my plate here so you can see that I'm lining up the screw holes and make sure that it's in the right orientation. So, and the USB port is over there, so that I will use the correct position of the stabilizer. Now with that plate in mind, obviously my stabilizer is going to be on that one, so it'll be, I think, the far outside one by the looks of it. Okay, so let's get my first stabilizer in. Now I think that's going to hook in. Is it going to be on the back? Does that work? I'm not 100% sure on these because you can't have it the other way, simply because if you do, the stabilizer just falls out. So there we go, clip and clip. Okay, so the actual stabilizer, if you've never built one with PCB mount stabilizers, there's this little bit of a foot that digs into the PCB. If I had it around the other way, because that edge is cut open, it wouldn't have held. So that has to be the correct way for the stabilizer to sit. Rightio. We there goes Jehovah's Dragon. Thank you very much for coming by onto the Bod podcast. Hope you have a happy new year, whoever you are. I love being able to boot people out of streams. So the next one, of course, is our modifiers. So let's try and get that into the hole. There we go. Is that going to work? Come on, come on. Why do you not want to cooperate? Have I got it the wrong way around? Let's try the other way around. Okay, there we go. I got them the wrong way around. So you can tell I build a lot of keyboards with stabilizers, can't you? Okay, so they're in. And then, once again, the enter key stabilizer. There we go. Then the backspace, which will be right at the top. So of course, if you don't mount your stabilizers first and then you use a plate, you're never going to be able to get them back on without desoldering every single switch. So make sure you do this the right way. How's it going, Stocks? Thanks very much for coming along onto the stream. I don't know what it was that your message was retracted, but hopefully it wasn't anything terribly horrible that would potentially get me upset enough to give you a boot. ANSI Master Race. You know, when I grew up typing and learning how to use computers, it wasn't ANSI, it was actually ISO. And then for some reason or other, our school keyboards were all ANSI keyboards, and I just ended up getting used to them. I think it was because they were Honeywell keyboards. Now this PCB already has SMD components pre-soldered on it, so I don't need to do any diode work on this. So what I'm doing now, after I've put in the stabilizers, is I'm going to put some switches through the corners of the plates to make sure that I'm putting them into the right positions, and then I will be soldering them in before I snap in the rest of the switches and then solder them in. So I'm using Gatoron greens. I originally had actually ordered Gatoron blues, but they were out of stock, and so rather than screwing around, I just went, whatever, I'll just switch them out to greens, and they had greens, so that was all good. Yeah, Relax Chan, it seems like, unless if you're sort of in the UK or in some parts of Europe, unless if you work with equipment that is very much specialized in that part of the world, it's very hard to find ISO keyboards. It really is. Not 100% sure why that is, since there is still a very large portion of people who do use ISO keyboards. But then in other parts of the world, of course, they also use things like AZERTY. I think France uses AZERTY keyboards. Is that correct? I know that if Outrage Pudding was here, he'd be able to tell me very quickly if I was right or wrong. So in this position here, in the backspace position, it's a very wide open slot. You do have to make sure that you get your pins and stuff aligned correctly, because if you don't, you're gonna have a bad time. So make sure that it's all seated properly before you sort of give it a firm nudge through. Now, why is, and of course my my stabilizers aren't fitting properly because they are not sitting flush. Okay, so I'm gonna have to pop that out. Stocks, no, I did not lube these, and I did not clip them either, so they are 100% mush, fully mushed and fully unlubed. What on earth is going on? Why are these not sitting down? Now I know that it might upset some people's sensibilities for me to do that, but you know what? That's just too bad, isn't it? This is such a weird design. These stabilizers the other way around. That's why it wasn't sitting flush. Yeah, come on. I've actually felt boards at meetups where people have clipped them and lubed them, and I don't feel it's a necessity. Like, I understand why you would want to do it if it was something that mattered to you, and that's great. Now, I'm actually going to give this keyboard away, by the way, and I want to leave it as stock as possible. The reason why I want to leave this keyboard as stock as possible is because it's going to be like a baseline keyboard. I don't want to be offering something that is super modded, super lubed, super clipped, with, you know, whiz-bang stuff, only because A, it's the cheapest stuff that you can possibly get as a 60% kit from Taobao. B, they didn't build it themselves. So they should be jumping into the deep end with the idea to say, well, I have this keyboard, this is the cheapest possible keyboard available, this is unmodded as stock as possible, and now when I make my own keyboard, my own custom keyboard, where I will lube stabs, where I will clip them, where I'll lube the switches, all of that kind of stuff, they will have something to compare it against. So that is the idea. Now, the reason why the stabs weren't sitting in properly, by the way, was because I had them flipped the wrong way around. The holes threw me off, and now it's sitting flush. Yeah, so, and I'm not doing LEDs because I don't own LEDs, and I'm also not an LED kind of person normally. I've got some keyboards that have LEDs. I've even got one keyboard now that's RGB. Amazing. But it's not something that I go out of my way specifically to have or to get. So, yeah. Now, this one always, this one in the corner is tricky because I need some keycaps. This one's tricky only because of the fact that, yeah, you can have multiple spots for it. So I'm going to pinch 3 keycaps off my actual keyboard, which is off screen, so I can make sure that I'm putting it into the right position. I think that looks about right. guess I'm going to have to snap in these other switches too while I'm at it to make sure that, whoa, man, that one pin's bent as buggery. There we go. That's going to have the right spacing on it. That looks good. And then, so this is actually also really common practice, is you actually put keycaps on the switches of concern for your alternate layouts, and that way you will ensure that they are actually seated correctly to where you need it to be. So I've actually got some switches, some keycaps, sorry, not switches, put on there, and I'm gonna pilfer one more from my Philco, which is off screen, and put that on. Yeah, so that's perfectly fine. So I've got them in the right place, and then I'm going to do that as well on the other side, but I have a suspicion that it should be the reverse, but we'll see in a couple of seconds. So normally you'll do the corner switches to make sure that everything is hunky-dory before you go soldering it in. But obviously I'm putting in more than just that. And you do want to check your spacebar as well, because yeah, see, so I didn't get that one lined up right because it's not actually fitting on. So I need to move it across one. So I'm just gonna come on, try and bump that switch back out of the PCB. Get up. Come on. Right, we're all pain. And then we move it over one, if it wants to behave. Come on. There we go. Ow. Switch pins are sharp, people. Okay, and then that fits fine there. And then the last one. Bottom row Swiss cheese is really hard to figure out, and yeah, the first keyboard that I built was a GH60, and I had exactly the same problem, but I followed exactly the same process as I'm doing now back then, which was dropping in switches and putting some keycaps on it to make sure it was okay, and it turned out just fine. So there we go. Now the last one, of course, is the spacebar, because spacebar matters, but I think it's going to be that one. Now, spacebars. I'm not taking my spacebar off my Philco simply because it's got CoStar stabilizers in it, and I'm not going to mess around with CoStar stabilizers at this point in time. But I do have some grab bag keys here. So hopefully one of these is a standard size. Is that a 625? That is indeed a 625. So I should be able to put that in against that. And yeah, so it'll be in that position right there. Okay, so we have ascertained the correct socket positions for our Swiss cheese bottom row, as Zangetsu calls it, and we'll make sure that that's all clipped in. Our stabilizers are free to move. All of these are in and flushed. Now I realize I was just doing a lot of that off the camera, but I'm just gonna push those down now and make sure that they're all good. Probably take those keycaps off now. Of course, make sure you use a decent keycap puller as well, not those horrible plastic things if you can avoid it, because they are just death. Those things are just death. So I'm just pushing gently to make sure everything pokes through the PCB. I'm not too worried about the plate side, because you can always pop the plates around as you need to. Now, put my keycaps back on. My poor keyboard. My poor Philco. Ooh, what have I just done? Okay, I'm still good. Still good. Right. That can go back. Co-stars feel good, but are a complete ball ache. I concur. But that said, I've never really had a problem with cherry. Never had a problem with cherry stabilizers. They're just so much more convenient. Now, let's bring back Monsieur Quad Hands. And let's find some convenient positions to clamp so we can start soldering. Which way do I want to go? I'm going to go that way. Now, this, of course, is by no means an advert for Quad Hands at all, but I have not regretted paying the exorbitant amount of money that I paid to get this thing at all. I paid a lot of money, and one person here knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know what? This isn't even going to clamp very well because I've got these silicone protectors on the clamps so it doesn't scratch up stuff, and they're actually too fat to get in. So I'm going to end up clamping on the plate. Now, it shouldn't be a problem only because I'm not exerting that much pressure on it. So I'm not going to be popping the switches back out of the PCB, but it is a little bit tricky. Making sure that that's going to be stable and not fall while I'm working on it. But investing in a good quality sort of helping hands is really, really important. Like, this one's very flexible, it's very strong, the magnets in it are superb for the feet, and you can actually lift the whole thing up off the table surface with it if you really, really wanted to, which I have done because I was testing it when I first got it. So, right, now, hopefully the glare's not going to be too bad, and it's time to boot up my TS100. So there it is. There's the iron. It's currently off, and I've only got a 12 volt power supply here, so let's just jack that in, and we'll press the front button. Look at that go. 26, 46, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. It's fast. It comes up super fast. It takes about 11 seconds or so, 15 seconds maybe. If I had a 24 volt power supply instead of the 12, it would be even faster. I think it can go from room temp to 300 in the space of like 7 seconds, something like that. And look at that, we're at 300 degrees. So we're ready to solder. I'm just going to move my microphone a little bit, and here we go. So I do apologize that I will be covering the light because my light sources in here aren't fantastic, but hopefully we'll still be. Actually, the first thing I want to do is I want to tin my tip, won't I? And just got zapped by a little bit of rosin right there. So I'm just gonna give it a bit of fresh coat, fresh tin. Probably should do a bit more of that when I finish so that I'm not messing up the tip as badly. There we go. First contact done. Now you can tell if it's a good solder joint because it should have a conical shape on the pin. When you're actually done with it, it shouldn't be all balled up. If it's balled up, then it means you're going to have a cold joint and you probably haven't had enough heat on the actual pin. The other thing that you can tell when you do this too is if it's been done right, it'll actually wick down the pin into the joint. So, because when you first start to apply solder, it's actually just sitting on the surface of the pin and the pad, and then as it starts to get pulled down by capillary action, since the solder is acting like a fluid, it'll actually suck downwards. So you can tell because it will actually wick downwards and form that conical shape that I'm talking about. Okay, so we've got our 3 switches on that done. Now we do the spacebar. Feed that in. Let that sit down. Now you don't need an excessive amount, and it's perfectly fine to have some of the pin actually still sticking out of the top of your solder joint. So there's no actual need for it to be completely covered. There is that misconception by some people who are new to soldering, and that often is just excessive amounts of solder, and that just causes all sorts of issues and makes it even harder when you're trying to desolder later on if you have to. Now, of course, I don't know where most of you guys are watching in from, except for Harshit, which is coming from India. And I know Zangetsu is from the US, but some of you guys are relatively new to me. So, you know, if you feel like it, you're more than welcome to introduce yourselves a little bit in the chat, especially to others, because it's a friendly community. And, you know, if you've never come across them before, on Reddit or Geek Hack or YouTube or whatever, then yeah, feel free to say hello to each other, introduce each other, because the community is very, very good and handy at helping each other out. So of course, if you don't know who I am, it's fantastic that you've made it to my stream, but my name's Don. I've been doing mechanical keyboards now since 2014, actually, to be precise. And yeah, I do a podcast called The Board Podcast, and of course I do this YouTube channel, which started after the podcast did. So I was just adding a little bit more heat and touching up there, and you'll see I've actually accidentally flowed and filled into that secondary hole there, which was not my intent. Now, I've actually got this PCB really high up at the moment, so I do have to shift it a little bit around to stay on camera. I'm going to be working down here in this little corner joint here. Let that suck it down. And then our last joint for the corner joins. Okay, one more, which I just did that off the camera. There we go. I am envious of Ski with Pete's sort of soldering cam setup. It's nice, but I do know that some people had issues with it because it does give them vertigo watching the solder going in and out, in and out. Okay, so what I like to do when I finish as well is I like to just give it another touch up just to reflow the joint, to make sure that I don't have a cold solder joint, and I can see if it reflows because it will get that liquid look about it, and if I haven't had a good solder contact on it, it will actually wick down a little bit as well. So, and that just helps reaffirm that I've heated the solder and the pad and the pin to the right temperature and had a good amount of contact between those components. It's okay to do it very lightly. You shouldn't hold your iron and keep it on there for a very long period of time because you are going to burn pads and components, but it is a useful thing to do. I had built a gherkin a while back, one of my early stream builds, and what had happened was it actually had some cold joints on the Pro Micro and it was messing up. Now I'm going to unplug my iron now and just let that cool because I have to now snap in the rest of the switches. But I I was really concerned because it meant that I would potentially have to desolder the whole Pro Micro. But before I did that, someone had said, you know, it could be just cold joints. And I just went through and reheated every single one of the joints on the Pro Micro, let it reflow in, suck down onto the pins, and then let it cool, plugged it in, tested it, and it worked. So that was a much better way of approaching things to make sure that I had good joints before I went to the pain of having to desolder the entire Pro Micro, which nobody would ever want to do unless if they were masochists, because desoldering those things really, truly are a painful experience. Right, so now let's take Mr. Quad Hands away again and start popping in some switches. Switch popping time. What is the actual time? So it's 11:20 right now, which means we're about 40 minutes away from the new year. Now, if you are going to be disappearing because you're in Australia and you're going to be checking out some celebrations or something, please, of course, by all means, do so. Don't let me hold you back. But my TV is in the same room that my daughter sleeps in, so that's not going to happen for me. I think they will have potentially fireworks locally here anyway, so you might hear them if I'm still building by then. But we'll see. We'll see. See how... I don't want to rush building a keyboard, obviously. You should never rush. You should take your time and enjoy what you do. And in a way, building keyboards can be really therapeutic, you know. I like doing stuff with my hands, like building things, you know, getting a sense of accomplishment. And unlike, say, playing Star Wars Battlefront, I know what I'm paying, and I'm not gambling, because if I bought a super cheap PCB like this, I know that there's a very good chance that it could be not a very good PCB, rather than hoping that it's going to be a good PCB and finding out that it isn't. But that's what we do. We experiment, we find, we play with. Yeah. Tell you what, the chat is being awfully quiet, but that's okay. I'm not going to force anybody to pip up. But if you do want to talk, by all means, please do. I mean, I don't bite, and I can't bite because I'm on the other side of the world from most of you people. Underglow PCB version, yes, picking them one up. Gymnastics, finger gymnastics to hold solder, iron PCB, and other stuff. Pseudo Mocha, hello from Melbourne. Thank you for joining in. Have another Aussie, which is fantastic. What on earth? Bent pin. Okay. The other thing that when you do these, by the way, is if you get bent pins, which is very common when you get a sack of switches anyway, is you got to watch out. You got to check them as you're inserting, because if you don't and you try and force it through and it's not straight enough, you're going to end up with even more bent pin, or you can even break it. So it's always a good idea to make sure that they are good before you insert them in. Did I test to make sure the PCB works? No, I did not. I don't know how to do that. So this is complete blind bag. If it doesn't work, I get to do another video on desoldering a full keyboard. Which, as unpleasant as that sounds, is probably well enough punishment for myself. Hush it. Thank you very much for the compliment about my voice. Yeah, the funny thing about voices is you never really know what you sound like to other people. And the reason for that is because when you talk, right, you hear your voice differently to everybody else. The reverberations within your skull actually changes the way that the audio sounds. So whenever you listen to yourself back off on tapes or videos, recordings, it sounds very different, and that's why a lot of people say, oh, you know, you hate hearing your own voice. and that's because of that issue. Oh, okay. Well, I suppose I can plug it in. I've got a thing here. So let's see if I zap myself, by the way. Oh, wrong type of connector. It's this type of connector. Is that the right way? Is that... What in the diggins? Whoa! Okay. So the underglow works. That's really bright. There you go. It works. But because it's a black plastic case, you're not going to see very much of that underglow, by the way. So whoever ends up winning this keyboard may have to invest in a clear case or something like that. So, yeah. Testing the switches I've already soldered in. Okay. I'm going to have to plug that back in. Eesh. And let me open switch header. Now, of course, you're not going to be seeing this because actually, I can do that. I'm just going to move it to my other... Oh, switch header doesn't go to full screen. Okay, rightio. So maybe I won't do that, but let's see. Escape works. Backspace works. Control Alt works. Interesting. Alt, Win, and Control works. So my mapping here is... Oh, it's a function key. Okay, right. I was like, what's going on here? I've soldered to a function key. So this switch here is a function key, and it does not seem to work because switch header doesn't detect functions because it's not native. Okay, cool. So the rest of them work, which is fantastic. I actually don't know how to change the LED colors since it's meant to be RGB underglow, and right now it's just white, but it works. Cool, 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 cool. So let's just keep snapping switches in. Simplicity. What I sound like and what I think my voice is are really different. Well, I mean, yes, you can be the judge of that, and of course there's other people that will more than happily judge you for it too. I think my wife has an absolutely incredible singing voice, and I often tell her that she should consider going on to, you know, singing competitions and things like that, but she doesn't think so. She's very good at singing and karaoke. Actually, pins. Her family, her siblings are actually all really good singers. Like, if you've ever gone to a party and somebody has like SingStar on, you can tell very quickly who's good and who's not. So, yeah. And her family are very good at it. So Stocks says if it's TMK or QMK, you can map RGB controls later. I don't believe it's QMK. This I think might be like a boot mapper kind of thing. So that might be interesting. But that said, that's for somebody else to worry about if they want to have controls. I mean, it is going to still glow, don't get me wrong, but they're not going to see it because it's going to be in a black case, unless if they bother to, though they probably want to turn it off, otherwise it's going to get really hot in that case. Probably not hot enough to actually melt the case, but it's probably not going to be nice for the case components and whatnot. So, I thought you were going to bed, man. You're still up at 4 o'clock. Or is it just like now you can't be bothered going to bed because you're awake? It's not my fault if you're tired later. I did the right thing by telling you to go to bed. Wow, look at that poor pin, if it'll come into focus. Come on. Completely mashed down. Gotta bend you back up gently. You are not a clever man. Well, I wouldn't say that I'm a clever man either. Yeah. Make it through? That made it through. Yeah. It's alright. It's the end of the year. You can make some resolutions to be a cleverer man next year, right? Isn't that how resolutions work? More clever, man. Right, now. I want to have this one in the middle. So, that... What are you doing? It's not that one, is it? It is that one. Because I believe for caps lock it's usually stepped in, right? It's normally stepped in. Slightly offset. Is that correct? Someone help me before I end up soldering it into the wrong position and giving somebody a nightmare to find keycaps for. Now for those people who are just starting their day somewhere around the world for New Year's Day, do you have any plans for today? Any parties to go to, or family gatherings, celebrations, barbecues, you know, that kind of thing? I just hung out at home and worked on a PCB design for like 6 hours. And then I finished it, and I was so pleased and happy about it. And then all the people who were helping me make the PCB in regards to giving me advice then proceeded to tell me all the mistakes that I made with it and how I should fix it. So, I mean, they weren't nasty about it. It was just more of a, like, my PCB technically works. It's just really messy. So if I want to make it a neater, nicer looking PCB, I would have to go back and change a whole bunch of things on how I routed the traces. I am still debating whether I'm going to do that or not. So, yeah. Now, of course, at this point in time, I can give a shameless shill for my own PCB, which is the fan pad, which I did a video on the other day, and I was showing off on Top Clack. So there's the fan pad right there. This is the version 2 PCB. I now have a version 3 that I'm working on, and if you're interested in it, please give me some feedback and let me know while I'm still working on it. And yeah, when I manage to get some money together so I can get another set of prototypes in, keep your eye out for it and let me know on that next interest check as well. You are loaded with the cold, so all you're doing is sneezing and drinking tea. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means you're not going out and getting drunk and putting yourself into embarrassing situations, getting yourself arrested, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, tea is good. Tea is amazing. Tea is life for many people, many people. Where are you actually located, by the way? I'm sorry if you've been on stream before and I haven't remembered who you are. We've got 14 people in here. Oh, man. These pins really hurt when you stab yourself. I don't know who these 14 people are because everyone else is being so quiet. Now this plate supports switch top opening too, by the way. As you can see, it's got the cutouts for switch top opening. So if the lucky winner of this eventually, because I'm not going to be giving this keyboard away today on the stream, but whoever ends up winning this keyboard wants to, they can actually open it up and lube it. So yeah. Is there a footprint that includes stabilizer location? PCB mount, that is. Yes. So are you using KeyCAD, Hashut? Scotland. Ah, I would love to go and visit Scotland. My wife has been to Scotland many years ago, and she has friends who live in Scotland, and she would love to go back as well. I wouldn't say that I'm a terribly big history buff, but I do like my sort of Anglo-Saxon history, ancient history, castles and all that kind of stuff. Love it. So doing a tour of the UK, the British Isles, all of that area, you know, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, England, and checking out those historical sites is on the top of my when I win the lottery kind of list. Ugh. Okay. So, Relax Chan, enjoying the last moment of my New Year's playing a game while looking at this build. What are you playing? And Hashit, if you're using KeyCAD, which keyboard part libraries do you have at the moment? Because there is a whole bunch of libraries, and all of those libraries do actually have footprints for the longer switches that include the stabilizer positions. And stock's best country in the world? Well, there's definitely a lot of good stuff that comes out of Scotland. There's some really lovely biscuits, for example, that my wife really enjoys. I believe they're Scottish biscuits. And then you also have some really good whiskey from out your way too. Not that I'm absolutely like a whiskey aficionado or anything like that. I do, you know, appreciate a nice whiskey when it's smooth and goes down well, but I don't have, currently at least, the taste buds. The two from the tutorial. Okay. What you want to look up is, I'll email it to you later, but if I don't, you'll have to remind me. I do have a link to a hybrid footprint library that I've been using now, and it's actually an MX Alps hybrid library. So I would actually recommend using that one because it's been really good and it does have the cutouts for it. Okay, so I've actually got a couple of spare switches, which is really great. Oh, The Witcher. I've not actually played any of that series, but it has won a whole bunch of awards, hasn't it? So the Hasu and the Techie library. Right. Rum guy. Oh, okay. I don't mind sweet alcohols, but not too sweet. So I think everything, of course, has its relative place. But yeah. So it is now 11:37. All of these are in, and they look flush against the plate. Doesn't look too bad, huh? The green with the blue. Yeah, pretty nice. So let's try not to stab myself. Let's bring Mr. Quad Hands back. And what I'm going to do this time, actually, I'm going to bend the arms out a little bit further down, and that way I can actually drop the working height, and maybe we'll be able to fit the whole PCB on the screen. No promises, but we'll try. Now, it is actually also a lot heavier now because we've put in all of those switches. So I will need to make sure that I get all of my corners properly supported. Otherwise, if it goes clunk, well, might ding the plate and goodness knows what else. Hey, look at that. It just fits, but it's at a funny angle. I'm just going to drop that a little bit further. Make sure that's all good. Fantastic. Rightio. It's go time. So let's turn the iron back on, let it rack up, and liberate some of my solder. 260 degrees, 270, 280, 290, and we are at 300. So let's just re-tin. Now I really should have some kind of fume extraction and whatnot in here, but I don't. So that's my own detriment to health, of course, but not you, dear viewers. So thankfully, I'd probably get in trouble if I could somehow harm the health of YouTube viewers from around the world. That said, you probably still could if you gave them bad advice and told them that it was perfectly fine and safe to do this in a small enclosed room for extended periods of time. So I'm going to say to you all, do not solder in small enclosed spaces for extended periods of time without adequate ventilation, because it will be unpleasant. Now I'm actually working right to left because it means I reduce the chances of me burning myself on hot soldered bits and pieces, in that if I work from left to right, my solder feeding hand, my left hand, has a risk of actually contacting the hot solder on the pins as I move from left to right, whereas that's less likely to with the iron, because the iron doesn't move as much. And also the angle that my hand sits when I'm working with the iron as well. I'm not actually hovering over the board, not over the PCB, and that way it is a bit safer. So always think about how you work and how you can maintain safety, because safety, of course, is very important. Nobody wants to get hurt, and at 300 degrees it doesn't cool down that fast, so it will stay hot for a very long time, and you definitely do not want to be giving yourself solder burn. Alright, no worries, Zangetsu. Have a good sleep. I'll catch you in the new year. You have a small USB powered fans, best thing you bought for soldering. That's really great. I would use something like that. Except for the fact that because I have a condenser microphone that's very sensitive, if I use a fan that's blowing across my workspace, it's actually going to get picked up on the microphone, which means you will hear the fan blowing against it. So I don't run that option either. I actually do have something that I'm trying to build. I'm still waiting for parts to come from eBay, which of course coming from China is super slow because it's cheap and they skimp on shipping. But if it works, then that'll be really cool. And if it doesn't, well, it didn't cost me very much, and it was a little kit project that I had in mind. So wow, that joint wasn't a very good looking one, so I'm just going to go back through and I'm just going to reheat it, and there we go. That's a little bit nicer. Which position is that one? It's going to be in that position. Okay, so second row is done, and my solder has been caught. On to row 3. Now, some people are really daunted about building their first keyboard, and they find that soldering is really scary, but to be honest, it's not. If you are concerned about difficulty of soldering, I'd say maybe get like a macro pad, like a really cheap one, because you're still going to be doing exactly the same thing, and if anything you'll get more soldering practice because you'll be potentially soldering things like Pro Micros, you'll be soldering diodes and header pins and stuff like that, so you'll get much better at it, and it'll boost your confidence in regards to what you're doing as well. So it's all about preparation, and that's both a physical aspect and a mental aspect. Having all the tools, the right tools by your side, knowing what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, having good quality tools, but within your budget, of course, because not everyone can afford very expensive soldering irons, or helping hands, or even really, really expensive solder. So know the limitations that you're working with, and you'll be fine. You'll be fine. There was a young fellow, I think he was 14, on the Australian Mech Keys Discord, who was really, really worried about building his first keyboard, to the point where he was willing to pay somebody else to build his keyboard for him. And everybody was like, dude, just chill out, man. Like, it's really not that hard to do your own build. And in the end, the Discord was actually able to convince him to try building it himself, which he did, and he was able to do it successfully. So, it goes to show, if you have a little bit of confidence in yourself, you'll turn out just fine. Now, my solder keeps going sideways off the spool and getting caught. I did have a guide on it, because this soldering spool holder that I've got here is one that I designed and 3D printed, but obviously it wasn't enough, so I may have to do a version 2 at some point in the future. Cameron Ape, what do I think of Ergodox keyboards? I have an Ergodox. I can type on it very slowly, and the bottom row is an absolute killer. I was able to get used to the sort of Ergodox ortho style for the upper rows, but I couldn't get used to the non-staggered ortholinear style for the bottom row. And I had a lot of troubles with the B, the C, and the V keys when I was typing, and I was making mistakes heaps. Now, because I use a full-size keyboard for work primarily, and I was doing a lot of work from home as well, I just didn't have the time that I could invest in trying to learn and getting accustomed to the Ergodox. It's a really great it's a great keyboard, it's a great form factor, and it really depends on your functionality and how easy and quick you're able to actually learn and adapt to it. But I know, for example, Binge swears by Ergodoxes. That's like, he can't type on any other form factor without getting pain, because of how his hands are and his wrists are. And that's one of the reasons why it even exists, is because it is a very ergonomic form factor. So if you're a bit on the fence about it, if you've got somebody or a meetup that you can actually go to try it and to check it out, then that would be the best way before you invest in actually getting an Ergodox kit or buying a pre-built Ergodox. But if you don't, then well, you can always take the plunge and then try and sell in at how much you bought it for, or very close to it, to reduce the amount of loss that you had on investing in it. Let's splits. Hey, Boom Boy. Happy New Year. We've still got 12 minutes. 12 minutes before New Year's kicks in here in Sydney. But then, of course, you've still got a couple of hours behind to settle in for the new year. Just going to keep steadily soldering away here if I can. Zangetsu is a Let's Split fanatic. So I actually do have a Let's Split, but the ortho life, I struggle with it so hard. I am very much an old dog when it comes to typing. My old tricks, I don't even touch type standard. I was actually talking to my sister-in-law's boyfriend about this last night at a family dinner, and I don't use spacebar with my right hand, and he does, because he learnt to touch type traditionally, which was the correct way of spacebarring using your right hand. I played a lot of games in my youth, and spacebar being jump, I did it with my left hand, so that's why I spacebar with my left. And it's little things like that, which is why I'm stuck in my ways, and stagger boards is pretty much the life for me at this point in time, unless if I had an extended period of time where I didn't have to work, and I could slowly munt my way through rather than sacrificing my ability to write at full pelt. So now I haven't read the chat because I'm desperately soldering away here. Well, I wouldn't really say desperately, but I'm trying to keep a steady pace. The good thing that I like about using fine solder, by the way, because a lot of people will be like, what's a good solder to use? It's a trade-off, right? Because 1 mil will deliver a lot of solder very quickly, but 1 mil is also bigger and thicker, so you need to deliver more heat. If you use a very fine solder like 0.4 mil, you use a lot of solder travel, as in your hands have to move a lot to deliver the same amount of solder, but you don't need to have as much thermal mass in your iron, and so therefore your iron can maintain high heat much easier and faster. 0.7 is kind of like an in-between. It's fine enough that you can do like SMD work with it. It's thin enough that you can get a good heat retention in your iron tip, and you can solder at a good rate and flow and speed like I'm doing right now. But it's got enough size in it that you don't have to feed too much of it as well. So you're not like feeding massive lengths to get the amount that you need to fill a solder joint. So we're on the home row. Whee! Rightio. Home stretch. Now, of course, if you're new to this stream and you've somehow come and joined our stream because of YouTube recommendations, or you just saw that there was a live thing about building a keyboard, welcome. A lot of us lurk and participate in the mechanical keyboard community on Reddit at the r/mechanical keyboard community right there. And there are other forums as well, such as GeekHack and Dexterity. And of course, if you come from other countries, there are other avenues too. So there are Korean and there are Chinese keyboard forums out there as well. Now, we have a couple of different podcasts and video feeds in our community. So for example, we have the Board Podcast, which is what I look after. We also have Keyboard The Makers, which is Jack Humbert's. We've got the Capcast, which is from Toby, also known as Cos Caps, and Crytone, which is Crap Caps. And then we have Top Clack, which is not so much a podcast as a video stream where Brian and Huey, go through things like the news of the week, and new group buys and artisans, and just talk about stuff. So there's heaps and heaps and heaps of content and things out there about mechanical keyboards. So if you're new and you'd like to know more, the information is available. And our subreddit, for example, in 2016 was, I believe, the 4th fastest growing subreddit. So, and there's over 200,000 subscribers there. Plenty of interaction. There's meetups happening all the time, all over the world in different countries. You can go and meet other keyboard enthusiasts. You can check out new keyboard designs, artisans, all of that kind of good stuff. Last switch. 1 pin and the last pin. And we're done. Can't believe it. We are done. That was a really, really quick build. It looks like they're all soldered in. Just checking over all of these. Look good. Look good to me. Let me check out what's happening here. We got 6 minutes before New Year's. Fantastic. So don't type the way you meant to. Bought a kit, waiting for it, interested in opinion. I do like the concept of the ergodox. I just wish I could devote more time to it. That's really my thoughts about the ergodox. You only have 4 let splits. I've got 1. Enough said there in regards to your fandom on let splits. Learn how to touch type from talking in games. What kind of words per minute do I get up to? If I'm purely typing at work, and if I'm like in the zone, I can type at about anywhere between 95 to about 100, 113. I've never really gone any faster than that. I've definitely not hit 120 before. But if I'm just, normal regular typing, nothing terribly exciting happening, I sort of float around the 70, 80 words per minute kind of speed. Okay. And then Andrew Butcher saying use split keyboards help straighten out bad typing habits. Pain in the ass to travel with, so selling off Let's Split to buy staggered. And then Kenneth, you've asked what soldering iron I'm using right now, and the iron that I'm using is the TS100. It's a very handy little iron. It's very affordable. It's fantastic in its performance, but I have actually modified it only yesterday by adding a bit of weight to it by wrapping solder around the actual top of that there. So I wanted it to be a bit more top heavy. Right, so we have some screws here and some rubber feet by the looks of it. So let's just open up that packet. I've got my little sauce tray that I use for holding small fine things in. So there's 4 feet there and a whole bunch of screws. There is my El Cheapo case. This was like $5. Lots of flex, but you know what? It does the job because its purpose is to protect the PCB. Let's drop that in. I can hear some people making noise outside, being hooligans or something. Now, I'm hoping that this will actually sit in properly. There we go. All right, so it's seated in, and let us put some screws into it. Could someone have a look at this? Can't send links. Yeah, I've actually disabled links only because of idiots that come in here and try and spam crap. So sorry about that. You can actually break it up if you want to, and that's still an option, but you just obviously have to be aware of that when you break it up so that people can recognize what part is being broken up. Oh no, dropped a screw. Get out, get out. 3 minutes to New Year's. You've messed up designing a PCB on KeyCard. Well, I've messed up designing a PCB on KeyCard as well, multiple times. But thankfully, I've now been able to successfully build one, and I know some of the mistakes that I've made, which is really handy. DHL will leave packages if nobody's home. I believe DHL will if you've actually arranged your permissions to do so. So if the package permits it, then when DHL let you know that your package is on its way, you can actually leave instructions saying that I give permission for the delivery person to actually drop it off. Yeah. Rightio. There's one in the middle there. I don't know if these are very good screws. It feels like I'm not really putting any force through them, but it feels like they're free turning. I don't know if it's just the standoffs are really crap or what. Oh, this one's not even lined up properly. This one's at an angle. Alright, let's loosen that one off. Loosen that one. Let's shift that over. There we go. Rightio. 1 minute, less than 1 minute to go. So I think we will just make it, won't we? Just watching the clock on my computer, because you know Windows time is relatively accurate for these kinds of things. And it is 12, so Happy New Year everybody. Happy New Year from the board. And of course, may all of your keyboard dreams in 2018 come true. Thank you very much guys for actually spending your evening or day or whatever it is where you are just hanging out with me while I complete this build. So yeah, people screaming outside. Typical Australian boganism, isn't it? Oh man, tell you what, these standoffs on this case are really horrible. I feel like I've either stripped them or munted them or something, but like, I'm barely, like I'm tightening with finger force here, and it doesn't feel like they're tightening up to any degree. But you know what? It's just, there we go. Happy New Year, Angus. Happy New Year, Simply. Yeah, I've got one more screw. Where's that meant to go? There's one there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one in the middle, one there, one there. That's it. All the screws are in and they've given me a spare. So you might be able to hear fireworks happening in the background. But like I said on the podcast actually last night, I'm not that huge a fireworks fan, so it doesn't really matter. And there is actually this horrible drone happening in the background because that's the council people actually doing street cleaning and stuff. So yeah, now I'm going to put some rubber feet onto this because that's what they're there for. It's nice that they came with rubber feet. This very cheap Taobao case. Assuming I can get it in correctly. So there. Oh, almost put two in the same spot. Almost put two in the same spot. Alright, there we go. The build is done. We have one of the cheapest 60% builds you can possibly get on Taobao, with Gatoron greens, with a aluminium plate and a cheap plastic case. It came in at about $55 Australian with shipping, I think, off the top of my head, which is really, really cheap. Now, of course, you can get cheaper OEM keyboards, but as a kit that you can build, that you can learn about building, that you can get experience soldering, that you can pick and choose your choice of switches, I think it's really fantastic value. I mean, if I wasn't going to be giving this away and I was traveling, I would probably take this with me because, you know, it could get beat up a bit and it wouldn't really matter. Now you can see the underglow through the switches there, but because it's a black case, you ain't seen diddly squat on that. Ooh, it does work. I forgot about that and it was plugged in. Very silly me. What I am gonna do though is I'm going to open switch header again. Switch header. Okay, there's switch header. And let's just open a new window right there. What I can do is open that baby up. That'll take it over to that side. And I'll share my right hand monitor. There's switch header. And let's just check it out. So uh-oh. Okay, so one switch, 9 is not working. Backspace is. Okay, so I've got two Alt keys. Now I know one key isn't responding because it's the menu key, and my 9 switch is not working. So I will definitely have to go back and maybe fix that. Of course, I probably should have done this before I screwed it into the case, but I wanted to actually finish this build. So that's bad. That's bad on me. Oh dear. Oh dear. I don't know about the programming, but whoever ends up with this will potentially be the one to have to deal with it. I mean, you can't complain too much, especially if I'm going to be paying shipping for it to wherever it ends up going. Now, switch hitter can't tell between Alt keys, but it's these two switches here. I'm just going to unjack it. So these two are actually the ones that were registering as Alt keys, and the Alt key on this side was registering as Alt key. So I don't know what's happening over here for one of these to be a double Alt, whereas that one's the function key there that was not being picked up by switch hitter. And then it's 9 up here that wasn't working. The bottom row might be off. My bottom row is off. What do you mean? What do you mean? How can my bottom row be off? In terms of position and placement? Well, the spacing between the two right keys of the spacebar, these are all 1, 2, 5s, I believe. That keycap doesn't seem to be doing a good job. Oh, it's very tight. What on earth is going on there? Did I just break something? That didn't sound very good at all. Oh, I've lifted. Whoa, I've actually managed to lift both stabilizers out of the plate. Oh, man. It's alright. It is technically fixable, but that is a seriously tight spacebar. Anyway, I am not going to mess with that any further on stream and embarrass myself any further. Maybe I will. It's still early. It's just past midnight. I'm youngish. That's the best part about this keyboard is I haven't committed to giving it away. I was intending to give it away. So if I munt this completely, there's no loss except for somebody who potentially could have won a keyboard that there will no longer be a keyboard for them to win. And then I'll just have a pile of scrap parts. And this is actually a really good experience for anybody, is if something goes wrong, to not panic, right? You just gotta go with it and then troubleshoot it and learn from the experience. Which hopefully I'm going to do right now. So, take all these screws out, if it'll let me. It will not let me. That screw is not playing ball. we go. Right. So, well, standoffs look okay. I don't know why they feel a bit funny. Right. Go on. 1, 2. 3, 4. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to try and fix my stabilizers. So they're still sitting in the socket, but the front end had popped off, and that is because it's a open PCB. So that front edge is cut, which makes it easier for this bit to pop out. I'm not actually a fan of PCBs that don't have their holes fully enclosed, but it does make the manufacture of the PCB cheaper because you don't have to run an extra sort of size of PCB, which will save you on wafer costs, and especially if you're in mass production of stuff, it will matter as well. So I'm just having a look at the back where they've actually got their silk screen on it. Let's see if we can figure out. So it says this is the side that I'm got issues with. So right Alt, and it says, so this one, okay, so it says right Alt, which was registering as Alt, and then it says apps, but this one was actually functioning as Alt as well. So I'm not sure what's happening there. And then number 9 is this one up here, and number 9, the joins look fine to me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out my multimeter and I'm going to test it electrically as well. Could be a mistake in the key map. Yeah, it could be. Could be. Cocktail sticks and shove them into the foot. Ah, toothpicks. Yes, I've heard of that that trick before. Okay, so here's my multimeter, and I'm going to just check that we get a resistance reading correct. So if the switch depresses and we get a signal between the two, then we are hunky-dory. If it doesn't, then it means there's possibly either a bad switch or a bad join. Blah. So I've got to try and use my chopstick skills. We have a switch. So we do actually get contact between that. So it may be a bad PCB or something. Now let's just check out a well, the diode seems to be good, so I don't know what that is. And then we should be able to check the resistance against and there's the resistance. I don't know. I don't know why that 9 isn't working. What I'm going to do is, unless if the traces in it are broken somehow. So let me think about how my matrix might look. Let's see if I can get, is that reading something? you can certainly maybe hear some fireworks happening well after the fact. Well, it looks like the mapping of the pins aren't okay. So switch to diode, so that must be the column. And we have good column to O. So the matrix seems to be fine. That's a little bit weird. Check the legs of the diode for that one. Missing one side of the diode. Skips the solder leg for it. Okay. That's you know what? You're dead right. Unfriggin' believable. Jolly Green Giant, you are a prince amongst men. So so this is the diode, right? I don't know if it's going to show up, but we'll see if we can get the focus on it. Look, yeah, there is no solder on that diode to the pad. That's incredible, absolutely incredible. So we're going to crank the iron back up, and we're going to dollop a little bit of solder on that and see if it fixes it. But I don't know why that apps key is registering as a alt key, unless if it's got the same symptom. It does have solder. It is visible solder, but it doesn't look like a lot. So maybe I'll give it another drop on it as well and see if it'll do that. I'm learning awesome stuff. This is really fantastic. Andrew asks, unrelated question, I have a titanium plate with a small imperfection that sticks out on an outer edge. What should I use to sand it down or cut it off with? I would say a very, very fine grit sandpaper or file. Man, you're making me work here, Jolly Green Giant. I'm gonna find some 125s to check the spacing. Yeah, I think that switch is off. Gonna raid my Philco because it's the easiest for me to do. Come on. I'm not making you do anything, man. It's completely your own choice. Got nothing to do with me. Got nothing to do with me. Damn it. Yeah, I should have started on this side out. So these are fine, but that one's off. That one's like just a fraction off, which means I would have to desolder these 3 switches to move them. But that's okay. Not making you do diddly. Diddly, diddly, diddly. Now, I'm not going to bother with the quad hand. We're gonna go in deep. Let's clean the tip. Let's refresh it a little bit. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to fix the bloody 9 diode, aren't I? Bloody hell. And then on this apps one as well, just because it can. Okay, now comes the solder sucker. Straight up pump action solder sucker. I hate desoldering. Come on. Well, I don't have a very good desolder iron. Would love to get a proper one, a much better one, but funds permitting, of course. Spend too much my money on parts and builds and hosting fees and things like that. Even though we do have sponsors, there's always, you know, costs that come up. The other thing about desoldering too, by the way, is you do want to go back and forth. You don't want to try and heat it up too much at the same time, simply because you do run the risk of burning and damaging pads. Now, here's going to be the dangerous part is the fact that it's going to be really bloody hot as well. And I'm going to try to use something to push that switch out. Let's see if it'll work or not. If I have desoldered it successfully. I don't know if I have or not yet. There's still a little bit of solder on each one of those. That is potentially binding them, so let's go again. Of course I need to clear that out because that entire pad is filled with solder. That's going to be really tricky to get, I think, hot and flowing. Ish. See, these cheap things, they break very easily. They're very sensitive. They don't always work very well.
potentially damaging this board by cranking heat into this, so much heat into this pin. It moves, so it's definitely free, but I've got to clear solder out of that pin port, otherwise, there we go, I'll never be able to put it back in. To refill the joint, to solder, to suck it up more. Yeah, I do that sometimes. I haven't had to do a lot of desoldering, thankfully, but I tend to find that if I can wiggle the pin under heat and then I just suck it, it'll just leave a little bit of a very fine kind of bridge that should be movable, breakable, maybe. Alright, so that one's freed up. That one seems to be mostly freed as well. Oh my gosh. If you feel pity for me, then I certainly wouldn't say no to if anybody ended up with a spare desoldering gun and they felt like donating it to a worthy cause. But those things aren't cheap, man. Desoldering guns with the desoldering pumps on them. Things are definitely not cheap. Probably wouldn't really need the justification to get one unless if you do a lot of desoldering, like if you're electronics repair or something. But I'll tell you, it's probably well worth it if you are working in that industry. Okay, so let's see if I can not burn myself and get that switch out. I really can't seem to get that switch out. I'm probably going to have to refill it and then go again. Wow, that's hot. This is really bugging me now that I can't get that switch out. Of course, I can't lose my patience, can I? Now we've got 12 people here watching me try and desolder this thing. What a great way to start the new year. Of course, if you've just yeah, I'm kind of trying to do that right now. I've just got to there we go. That took a lot of force. Okay, so that pin's out, that one's not. And that one's out. Okay, so that one's still not playing nice. Come on.
I think that's done it. Maybe. There we go. And it's through. Woo. What an ordeal. Hey, Shan Collins, thanks very much for joining in. So what had happened earlier was that I had actually soldered these bottom row switches and I had got my spacing incorrect. So I ended up making one of them 1U and then 125, 125, 125, and that was not really helpful because it meant that the keycaps weren't fitting on properly. And the second issue that I was trying to deal with was that one of my switches wasn't actually working, and it turns out through our investigation that they hadn't soldered properly the diode onto the PCB. Now something came off with one of these switches on the leg. I don't know if it was just a big chunk of solder or if it actually ripped a chunk of the PCB off with it. All the through holes look okay. So now we are going to do the right thing. Part 2, which is we're going to put some keycaps on and then we'll put them back on in the position that they're supposed to be on, and then solder them back on. Hopefully. Alright, let's just heat this one a little bit because that one's got a lot of solder that wicked through. I'm probably melting the leg a little bit there. Okay. That's good to go. Try not to burn myself on it. There we go. It's in. Swiss cheese definitely got me good. You can tell how many 60% I build, right, with plates. Because you generally don't get this problem if you don't use plates. Because the plate won't confuse you. Or, should I say, universal plates. Because I do build stuff with plates. They're just already set up for the layout that I want, as opposed to you've got too much choice there, Sunny Jim. Which is what the problem was with this. I had way too much choice. And that pin is bent sideways. Come on. Yep. Yep. Well, at least you're enjoying this, Jolly, aren't you? But it's see what I was complaining about earlier? This pad here is still filled in. That's why the bloody switch wasn't going through. Pad's full of stuff. I'm gonna sucker out that pad. Uh-oh. No! The spring is disengaged. Ah! My spring has disengaged. Gonna have to do the old blow through.
this is just getting to be a bloody nightmare. To use maybe something to just poke it through very quickly. There we go. Melt a bit of plastic while I'm at it. Heat it and shove the switch in. Yeah, but that would require too much coordination. It'd cool down by the time I tried to get that in. Look at how much solder it pushed out. Well, you probably can't see it very well, but that massive blob of solder right there. Yeah. Okay, there we go. Cleared that out. You're dying. It's like 5:30. Oh, just, I don't know, have some more coffee or a Red Bull or something. You'll be fine, right? I mean, it's only New Year's Day. I mean, New Year's Eve for you. Yeah? You only live once. Alrighty. So they're back on. Let's finish soldering these back in. Go on. The problem with why I had such a difficult time desoldering was because I soldered them too good. I did them too well. And I was punished for it. I had them wicked in nicely. Had good solid joints. Nearly burnt myself just then. I felt the heat and I pulled away in time. Rightio. Hopefully that'll be it. And now, I'm not going to put it back in the case, but I am going to jack it in. There's the cable. Way. So the underglow is still good. Only happens once, right? Well, New Year's Eve 2017 is only going to happen once, so yep, that sounds about right. Let me open up switch heater again, and let's see if we fixed the problem with the 9 switch at least. So switch heater on, switch over to the left monitor. Ooh, gotta get into switch heater. Yay! So thank you very much, Jolly Green Giant. Now, Alt key, menu key, function key, control. Excellent. Excellent. So, looks like we did fix that menu key problem right there. And everything else, I believe, should work. I'm just going to give them a quick run through. Hopefully we haven't broken anything else in the process. Pew, 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 pew. Hooray! Success! We got there. We finally got there. It only took like an hour longer than it should have. Success, success, success. Thank you very much, everybody, of course, for hanging out. I mean, it's almost a 2-hour live stream now at this point in time, but the build works and everything is hunky-dory, although it seems like that that spacebar was really, really bloody tight. Now, I can mount it back in, but I might wait until tomorrow when I can actually find something that I can just shove into there to really tighten that up, or maybe I'll just put a drop of, I don't want to hot glue it.
you know what? Whoever does end up winning this keyboard, it can be their problem. Does not have to be my problem. So, sure, that's not a very nice attitude to have, but hey, that's all right. Hey, it is the first success of 2018. It is, hey, Wilbur, I did say hot glue. I was thinking about hot gluing the stabilizer because the PCB on this has an open cut edge. So the open cut edge means the back end of the stabilizer isn't fully held in, and I had a very tight DSA spacebar that I was trying to take off, and it actually popped both stabilizers out. So I was thinking about if I should just put like a drop of hot glue on it to fatten it up to stop it from pinching in and popping out. What caps am I using? I don't know what caps they will use on this because I'm not going to put any caps on it. I don't have any spare key sets. I might be able to cobble a Vomit keycap set onto it from my 4 grab bags that I have, but that's no guarantee at this point in time either. I have a Philco Magus Touch normally, which is what I use, and that's just the Philco OEM keycaps. So yeah, I don't use toothpicks at home. We don't have toothpicks at home, so I don't actually know if I have any toothpicks that I can use, which is why I suggested possibly using hot glue. So if we do have toothpicks, I could possibly use toothpicks. But what I am going to do for the moment though is I'm not going to put those screws on in case I can find some toothpicks tomorrow, and maybe there'll be something available in the kitchen, but I'm not going to go rummaging around at this point in time for that. Rightio. Now I'm just packing up and wrapping up and waiting for my iron to cool down. Any questions before we finish tonight's, and I would say successful, live stream, and having a look at the components that you can get for about $55 Australian from Taobao. I mean, it came with all the switches, it came with, I think, probably copies of the Cherry stabilizers, came with an alu plate, which is quite nice, a good color. That worked, everything clipped into it. You know, it's got a very simple, cheap case, except for the fact that it does the job. No complaints there at all. And the PCB seems to work. Now, of course, how reliable it is, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to be using it long enough to know if it dies or not. And it promised RGB underglow. We got some underglow, but with this case, you're not going to see it. So it's really just a matter of figuring out if you're going to get yourself a better case or just turning the underglow off once you figure out the functions. Now, I actually don't know what it powers off in terms of its software. So if somebody does know, then that would be really great. That would be really useful to know. And I'm going to put these keycaps back on my Philco. Menu key, Windows key 8. Wait. Why is that not going on? There we go. And Alt key. Done. Done and dusted. Yeah. Well, it seems like the chat's been pretty quiet. So, unless if there's anything else that people are gonna ask and throw into the chat box, we might wrap it up from there, and I can finish packing up and get ready to head to bed. Now, I did say that I was going to give this away. I will run a competition for it, and I was intending to run it when we hit 1,200 subscribers. Now, I don't have enough stuff. I don't have a lot of money that I can constantly give stuff every 100. So now that we've gone over 1,000, we're going to slow it down just a touch, I think, and maybe every 200 subscribers, hopefully we might have something that we can do and give away. So when we reach 1,200 subscribers, I'll run a giveaway for this. Now, of course, it will be open to everybody, but it would be nice if somebody managed to win this who was completely new to the keyboard scene, because as I was saying earlier, it would be a great keyboard for them to have as a baseline, and then they can learn about building their own keyboards, as well as discovering what the differences are and how they feel when you start modding your keyboard, because this keyboard would be 100% stock. Now I'm just going to test the switch opening capabilities of this plate, because I've said it's got switch opening on it, and well, it does open the switch. So I'm not very good with this switch layer opening tool, mind you. Like, I got one side of the casing open. I don't have the other side up yet, but I'm not very practiced at opening switches because I don't really do any switch modding or lubing at the moment. So there we go. Rightio. So you can see that plate does support switch top opening as well. Now it does have LEDs available in it, but if you want to put in LEDs, you'd have to open up, or not maybe, but then you'd certainly have to do more soldering, because you'd have to run long legs through the holes, through the pins, out to the other side and solder them and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's going to be still very hot. Still very hot. Okay. Put my switch opening tools back in, and we might wrap it from there. So thank you very much, guys, for coming along, hanging out with me, and spending my New Year's Eve and the first hour of New Year's Day with me, checking out and building the cheapest Taobao 60% keyboard you can possibly buy. Hi, Outrage Pudding. It's pretty much done. Yes, you missed all of it, but I guess if you really wanted to check it out on stream, on the video on demand later, you sure can. I was just wrapping up and saying goodbye, and today in Australia it is the 1st of 2018. So Chris, you know what that means. just pulling your chain there. It's all good. So Happy New Year, Wilbur. Happy New Year to everybody. Thank you very much for coming along, and hope to catch up with you on the next time we do a stream. And make sure you subscribe to our channel so you stay up to date with all of our videos. And of course, you can have an RSS feed to make sure you stay up to date with all of our podcast episodes as well. So now I'm going to say goodbye, and I'm going to wave and count, because there's always a lag between hit and stop and the stream stopping. So I don't want to truncate. Until next time, happy clacking.